Welcome to the Death and All the Rest podcast, where we talk about life, death, and everything in between. Hey, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How about you?
I'm good.
So we always pregame before this, but we have a topic at hand, and I want to introduce it because it's once again it's a controversial topic for sure, and pretty vulnerable. Like last week, our last episode was also a vulnerable topic, so just want to put that out there at the forefront.
Good.
It's the idea of euthanasia or assisted suicide. And what brought this to mind for me, like where this came up in part of the discussion, honestly, though, this is something that I think about often. But what brought it up this time in this wave of thinking about it, I saw this post on Instagram this week where this professional photographer was the son of these two people, this couple who had decided that they were both, the mom was like 86 and the dad was 90, and they had decided that they were worried that one of them was going to die of natural causes sooner than later because of their advanced age, and they didn't want to go through the loss of the other person. They were best friends and they'd spent their lives together, and they just decided that they weren't interested in letting that scenario play out. So they went and they did assisted suicide. I think this was in the Netherlands. And then, so anyway, this what was like interesting about it is the son is a photographer, so he took a photo of his parents. He asked them beforehand like what they thought about that, and if he made this public and posted it, and they said that they thought that was great. So he did, and he said a lot of people, the response was like how beautiful this was, that these people got to choose to go out on their terms. They got to go out together, they lived together, and they died together, and they thought that that was really beautiful. And he said that he gets why people would feel that way, but being that it was his parents, like it's really hard for him to see it that way. It's just a big loss. He feels a lot of loss, and a lot of his own controversy in his own head about it. Like he said, he understands that his parents were best friends and that this was a great way for them to go together, but also like complicated, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so then bringing that to just like different themes, different topics that feed into uh, death with dignity is in the U.S. is what they call it, or assisted suicide or euthanasia or whatever, and how controversial this is and why it's controversial. And I mean, we're just going to kind of pick it apart and go for it.
Yeah. So it seems like this is a topic of our time. And I mean, it didn't used to exist in the sense that there was no legislation to back
Right.
this up. It seems like in Europe, particularly around the Scandinavian countries, I may be wrong about that, were at first started to grow, or maybe in America, but in this country, in the United States, there are multiple states that have death with dignity. There are some where it's pending. Legislation is working its way through the courts, and there's people who are for it and people who are against it.
Yeah.
And there's states that may be actually um, putting legislation in place to ensure that it doesn't happen.
States that already have it that
Right.
are trying to basically like overturn it. Yeah.
Overturn it. Yeah. Yeah. Much better. So uh, this is a controversial topic, and it probably should be. This is this is a purpose of existence is to exist and continue on life, and to actively choose to end your life is a very big topic for anybody.
Yeah. 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 It's one of the decisions, one of the only decisions in life that is completely final, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no coming back from that. So making sure, like, yeah, we would want to make sure that people are in a place where they're of sound mind to make a decision like that for themselves, and that they've really thought through that. Um, and at the same time, and we were humans and autonomy, right? Like there's this argument to be made that like having autonomy for decisions like that. And I think, here in the US, it's very specific the criteria to meet to be able to have death with dignity. And death with dignity is you work with a doctor and you've been evaluated and all of that, and you have to meet the criteria of terminal illness with less than 6 months to live. You have to be an adult. You have to live in a state with death with dignity, and then they prescribe you a medication,
Mm-hmm.
and you can take that wherever, not in public. There's like a disclaimer around that. You can't take it in public, but you can take that wherever you want, whether that's at home or you're with, you go to a friend's house or, whatever private place of your choice, and you take that med. You dispense it to yourself. So you have to be able to dispense the med to yourself and ingest it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but very tight criteria where in Sweden, there's a little bit, or Netherlands, Sweden, and there's a little bit more wiggle room, it
Mm-hmm.
seems, for that. Like this couple that died, it does say that they have to demonstrate that they're experiencing suffering that won't end. And I'm not sure like how that was gauged for this couple, because clearly they
Mm-hmm.
were approved for it. And it didn't, the what I read, the article that I read, didn't say anything explicitly about one of them being very ill or anything like that, though they certainly could have been. But still, there was like an allowance for the other partner to also be able to do it. So it sounds like maybe there was taking into stock like the emotional pain and suffering that
Mm-hmm.
that would cause, losing their partner. So there's some differences in that too, and even like what's allowed and what's not. So it is complicated, and it's the kind of thing too that, you know we've said before, like who has the right or the power
Yeah.
or the say so to decide that somebody can take their own life. Like, these doctors or the people who have to do the psych evaluation to make sure you're in a state of sound mind. Like, you know I don't know, it's just that in and of itself, right? Like we're not able to make that decision for ourselves legally, I guess, right? Like we can always make that decision for ourselves, but like if we want to do this in a way where we're getting prescribed the meds and stuff. um but what makes it, what qualifies somebody to be able to have that kind of choosing power, and there's the whole like Dr. Kevorkian
Yeah.
controversy that happened years and years ago.
Yeah. I feel like this is one of those weird topics where it involves a social contract, like the individual's relationship to the state and what
Yeah.
the state can enforce on the individual, and how much agreement the individual or leeway the individual gives to the state to get the benefits of living in a society. But and I also think on top of that, there's like, I think in some ways we can agree on the basic principles of this, in the sense
Mhm.
that somebody has the right to determine the course of their own life. Yes, I think most of us can agree to that. Most of us agree that there is a potential for suffering that overwhelms um, the quality of life, that
Yeah.
wipes out all the benefits of living, um, and makes it for lack of a better term, a hell on earth.
Yeah.
And there is also the people. We also recognize that people have the capacity to make decisions for themselves, but that they can lose that capacity, whether through it's just extreme suffering and they're in just such a massive level of distress that they can't choose for themselves, or through dementia, the deterioration of the brain, and something
Yeah.
like that. So, like, we could have some basic, absolute agreements on the very like farthest end of this discussion or this
Hmm.
topic, but at the same time, not be able to come to an answer that satisfies everybody, and it may be impossible to do
Right.
that. Whatever, religion has a lot to say about this, and there's some truth in there, I would imagine. Individual right, people who are very much about purely atheists and very much about the individual's right in society can have strong opinions on this. And is it possible for us to legislate this and enforce it fair for everybody? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if we can like put together a calculus, a system that checks all these boxes and ensures that this is done appropriately in all circumstances. But at the same time, I think we should have something like this.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you because I think the way that it is, at least in the U.S. as it stands right now, it probably still is controversial
Mm-hmm.
individually to different people, but like that seems like the baseline of like I feel like most people would agree with this. Oh, you're terminally ill, you'll die within the next 6 months, and you'll be suffering. So instead of having to go through the rigmarole of that suffering and that illness, you can end it. Because I mean, like we have that for our animals. That's can they euthanize our pets when they're really sick, right? So like we understand and we seem to agree on that level. Not everybody, but we seem to agree that that's reasonable. I think where it gets murky is like these things like someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, the way it's written right now, like they can't sign on for this. But at a certain point, like because sound state of mind, right? Like
Right.
they're not in
Yeah.
they're not having a lot of lucid moments, and to be able to do that, that's difficult. Um, and like I mean, those people are suffering too, and so this is where it really gets more controversial, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it starts to get like into this other stuff, right? Like something like that. Or there's like a famous movie about this topic, actually, Me Before You. It's called, with Emilia Clarke and Sam Claflin, and he had gotten into an accident years before, and he was super active, adventurous guy before, and then he was quadriplegic after the accident, and um, he ultimately ends up doing the assisted suicide. And uh, what was interesting is when that movie came out, that was very controversial too, because a lot of people felt like that was saying that people with disabilities are basically being told that like life's not worth living, right? Because this
Right.
guy, he was still cognizant and conscious and could have conversations and could have a life. And in the movie, his big thing is like, but it's not my life. It's not
Yeah.
the life that I want and that I value. And I get the controversy around that, because on
Yeah.
one hand it's like, there's this existential piece of like we can find new meaning.
Mm-hmm.
We can find ways to have this new life feel fulfilling and feel like there's a purpose in it for us. And also I get it on the other end of that too, that like when our identity is wrapped up in something and this is just what makes us feel excited and passionate, like living without that does feel like a lesser existence to an extent for some people. I think that's there's a difference in like um the way that people see this, the way that people decide that they want to overcome something, or that they're not interested in that. There are some people who are going to find it point in all of that and saying all of that before I get too tangential and away from where I'm going, is that I understand the controversy around it. But the thing is, if things are options, it doesn't mean everybody has to take it. Right? Like it's
Right.
just available. You don't have to, even with death with dignity as it stands in the US right now, the legality around it, like you absolutely don't have to take up that option if you're terminally ill. You can let that illness play out and die naturally the way that the illness will play out. But there's this option, and that's where I think for me it comes down to like, is the option bad to have?
I would say no. I think you may bring up the like one of the central points to all this is it's a worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just trying to put something in place to avoid that. And that sounds wise. That sounds, cautious and careful because, and using forethought. so that you don't end up in some circumstances like that. Do you want that to happen? No. But are you covering a bet that is, you know, the is our existence, is the existential fear that we have? Yeah, that makes sense. And then the other component to me is the word dignity. Um, People, we all crave that, I would imagine. You know, the ability to leave, have the capacity and live a dignified life as we define it,
Mm-hmm.
individually, culturally, socially, and to maintain that. And the loss of that um, is already the loss of self, in a sense, you know, of who you are. To be, you could be made a burden that it makes life harder on the people that you have spent your entire life protecting or that you care about more than you may care about yourself.
And for
Or,
some people, that is intolerable to them,
yeah,
right? Because it's like, it's not even about like other people, like those other people might not mind at all taking care of you, but to the person that has been it's centered in identity and taking care of other people, protecting other people, to then feel like they have become a burden in any sense, that's just it's unbearable.
yes, yes. For certain people, yeah, that's horrific.
Yeah.
Um, so people are different people are going to define this in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the only thing we could all agree on is we don't like this topic. You know, it's kind of, this is, unfortunately, this is unsolvable perfectly.
Yeah.
And as you know, we have increased our capacity to live, you know, our lives, the potential for a life, we can live longer and longer. It's not a guarantee. There's other things going on in society and in the world that are decreasing our lifespan. But so the longer you live doesn't guarantee quality of life. Um, and in fact, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it could deteriorate and
Sure.
you could live for quite some time. Um, we have the capacity to just almost not indefinitely, but to continue life beyond when the body itself is ready to die. You know,
Mm-hmm.
put people on machines. Uh, who gets to decide that? This is a huge issue that we're not fully, maybe we're not fully capable of answering this. And that's a frightening concept. We lack the capacity to put in place a system and a structure that supports this properly. But we're trying, you know, a human
Yeah.
way as best we can to do that. You know, there's a phrase now they talk about your lifespan, but they also have a phrase now. I'm not sure if I'm getting this right, but the health span,
Mm.
or where you have a capacity to be a healthy, functional human being. And we want to stretch that out as long as we can, too.
Sure.
Where's that? What do we do when those things are in conflict?
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. Because I do appreciate the intentionality behind coming up with something like this, because like there are things to take into consideration. You know, we don't want people prematurely or impulsively making a choice like this that, like we said, I mean, it's final, right? And last week on our last episode, we were talking about suicide.
Yeah.
You know, so there's this like juxtaposition here of like when it's okay to end your life and when it's not okay to end your life, and this all gets muddled with each other. So like the intentionality behind it, I think is I can appreciate that a lot. But I guess it's like the the idea of that not being an option, and I mean this is like a fairly new legislation even
Mm-hmm.
as it stands, um and it's still not an option in a lot of states, but like of this not being an option, at least as it exists right now with this criteria of terminal illness and that kind of thing, feels cruel, feels unfair,
Yeah.
you know, because again, like you don't have to take this option, but like, you know, we can extend that level of compassion to the humans in our society that we give to our animals. Like that's a little crazy to me, because I'll be honest, for myself, like one of the reasons I moved to Oregon in the first place, I mean, it was tied into a job offer that I got, but when I was looking, I had a couple of job offers. I had one in Oregon, I had one in Virginia, I had one in Illinois, I think.
Mhm.
And with all of that, like something I really liked about Oregon is death with dignity is an option. And as much as like I've talked about my own fear of death and like I don't want to die, I don't want to die, but I also don't want to suffer more than I don't want to die.
Yeah.
Like if it comes down to the wire and I'm gonna suffer and I know it's the end of life and there's nothing I can do about that, right? Like, well, fuck you if you think I'm gonna suffer through that. Like that's crazy, you know? But like that was a big draw for me in living here. And honestly, like that was intentional. That was part of the decision making process, because I think that for me, I value that very much as a human. I value that option. I like having that option. Um, but I get like the nuance to this stuff where it goes beyond, because again, even if it exists for terminal illness, not everybody has to take it, but
Mhm.
where it starts to get really really complicated is this other stuff that we're talking about, like at the onset of having Alzheimer's, like if they said they were trying to create legislation for that, or and dementia, to create some kind of system for people like going through that so that they don't have to suffer for, I mean, an indeterminate amount of time, right?
Yeah.
But to where they can't make that decision, or something like that movie that I was talking about, where this guy, I mean, he was in a lot of pain and stuff too. It wasn't just that he lost his ability to do certain things, but he was in a lot of pain. Wasn't going to die from it. Wasn't terminal, but like those kinds of things. And then yeah, like I mean, let's like we can breach the part of this that feels really dicey and really controversial, like the suicide part of this, the mental health aspect of not wanting to be alive, right? Like
Mm.
that's real.
Yeah.
We're here to open up the conversations that are hard to have.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also very common, or not very common, but it exists in human life to have a very dark period where
Yeah.
you are suicidal. You feel suicidal, maybe dip in and out of it. Maybe you feel that all the time.
Mm.
And you don't want to be on this planet, or mentally or physically. And then those circumstances change, and
Yeah.
your quality
Yes.
of life improves. And you're like, whew,
Thank God I
man,
didn't, right?
yeah.
Thank God.
And sometimes somebody on the outside can see you through that, and like, this person can make it through this, or this person has a chance. They can't see it right now. They
Yeah.
need my support to
Yeah.
make it through to the other side, and regain their life. And that sounds pretty good to me too. um
Mm-hmm.
how do we this is tough. This is very, very difficult. There's not a one size fits all solution to this.
No.
um and we're trying. I guess that maybe that's a big part of it. We're trying to hopefully do the right thing. And there's going to be conflict in how people see that, because there's too many variables at play here. There's too many different opinions. There's too many different lenses and perspectives to view this, and there's just too many actual variables for how a life can go to have the correct answer.
Yeah.
We have to
Yeah.
grapple with it, and it's going to
Yep.
be incomplete. Um, but this is also not one of those things where you want to like just let it slide, and it sneaks up on you and happens to you or to your
Right.
loved ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that we're trying to identify that moral right and wrong, but in the
Yeah,
gray area, and that's where it gets so
yeah,
complicated, right? Because
yeah.
it's like there's always going to be different beliefs around that, and it's like it reminds me of the people, like parents specifically come to mind, where they lose a child and then they end up taking their own life because that pain. And it's that this idea that someone's suffering, like measuring somebody else's suffering is impossible, and how long that suffering will last, like we can't know that. This is the information we can't know, whether it's mental health or it's something like that I was just saying. But like you were saying, right, there's this risk of, well, what if, even if it's 5 years from now, what if this person finds this version of life where they have happiness again and they feel good again, right? And like, but because even if they were living in a couple of years where it was really terrible and miserable, but like what if there's a light at the other side of the tunnel? But we don't know that. And it's hard to like, it's hard to say that somebody else gets to decide that for another person. And sometimes, like, the reality is, as mental health professionals, we know, like, sometimes you have to decide that for another person, because like we can see that the internal struggle is so big and what's happening there, that like they wouldn't be able to see past that, right? It's like what we were talking about last week in the teen suicide specifically. But like they don't have the forethought to be able to consider that this is going to end, this part of the suffering is going to end, and that it can get better. But we also don't know for everybody if it's going to get better or not. There's no measure for that, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. And on a parent, there's a sense of duty, a very real. This is part of your
Sure.
job, is to help them through this as best you can. I know it's hard.
Sure.
Um, so what we're talking about here is the essence of personal freedom and responsibility to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and to others. Society's responsibility to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals, potentially, their responsibility to society. Um, and I don't have the answer. Don't have the answer. I know that I know where I land for myself,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I would not want to go on with it.
If what?
If I was in extreme pain, no. More importantly, I mean that's very real. But if I was, and I have thought about this because of my mind and how my mind works, if I was to cease being Chris, if I was to lose myself and my identity, I don't want to exist. I take that very seriously. I have had family members who had dementia, Alzheimer's, multiple,
Mm.
and I'm now experienced with that, and I do not choose that for myself. I'm not going to take action in advance because they weren't capable of making that decision for themselves any longer.
Right.
So I will not allow that to occur. I've already taken steps along those lines. That's my decision. That's my life path. I believe I'm rational, and I have put in thought and analysis into it. Um, and I had the benefit of doing that. So I did.
Yeah. Hearing from you is actually really interesting too, because you were suicidal,
Mm-hmm.
and then it felt like you were close enough that you had a plan and you
Mm-hmm.
were thinking through all of these details. And then, I mean, kind of like we're doing engaging in behavior that was killing you day in and day out for
Yeah.
decades, right?
Yeah.
But like, so I guess I'd love to hear from you, just like your own perspective, because you said that, like, on the one hand of like losing myself as far as dementia or Alzheimer's, like
Sure.
if you were to lose that ability to know who you are and what your life is and what you like, who other people are, stuff like that. As someone who was suicidal at some point, are you glad that you stuck around?
Yes. I mean, I'm actually, and I think speaks to a lot of people's condition or will. I'm of more than one mind on this.
Uh-huh.
At my very core, I still don't really want to be here, and I never have, as far
Yeah.
back as I can remember, and that's part of my identity.
Yeah.
And there was a moment, a nadir point, where it's all I could think of, and that's I was like, I want out, and I
Hmm.
don't want to do this. I don't want to have a full life. and I went past that, but I still feel that way at a certain level. However, I also like understand that life has this component of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm kind of in it for the fight, to be honest. I may feel that way at my core, but I'm going to fight it out as long as I can, and try to squeeze as much as I can out of it, or at least see as much, experience as much. And if I had to feel that way, maybe, and I don't have that core sense of value in my existence, maybe, but I can bring that to other people. I can help other people who are dealing with the same thing. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah.
There's all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a fantastic partner who I love.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in it for her. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I didn't make it through that period, I never would have met her. And if I hadn't gone through that, maybe I wouldn't have met her. Probably wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And if I wouldn't be the person that I am to be here and to see these things clearly and to be like, I'm going to do this for her and be here for her and be here for myself with her.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So there's all that, you
Yeah.
know? And I'm also here to like execute her wishes as well about this very topic, you know, because
Yeah.
she's has some issues with this too, and she's thought it through,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I'm here to support her and her decisions and her beliefs. That's very core to what how I define myself as a man, and I get a sense of a purpose and duty, and more reason to live out of being that person.
Yep.
I don't know. What do you think
Center
about
to your
that?
identity.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just like, and I think this is one of those episodes where we're not having a conversation that's like to teach anything or
Yeah,
employ strategy and skill. Like this is just one of the conversations that's very existential. This is just an existential, like it's literally about living versus dying and what that means. And we're just opening up this conversation because I think it's a hard conversation for people to have. I like in the same vein as death, but not even necessarily assisted suicide stuff. Like my husband has a hard time when I've had conversations about like, hey, like, if I die first, like this is what I want. This is what I want done with my body. If I'm in some kind of situation where I'm brain dead, like this is what I'd like. Blah blah blah, like that kind of stuff, and walking him through it because he's my next of kin. He would need to know that information, and he hates it. He
yeah,
hates those conversations. He's like, I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to think about you dying. And I'm like, I understand that. And like, we don't know. Like, I could
yeah,
die any time. And this is information that I want you to have because like, these things it's important to me, my choice of like what I want done with my body. Like, that's important to me because for me, like, don't fucking waste that shit. You put me like here in Oregon, they do this thing where they can turn you into fertilizer,
yeah. It's great.
and then like good, make me fertilizer, put me back, like have me have a purpose, right? I like
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
but like I know these are the kind of conversations a lot of people shy away from even having, even thinking about with this stuff, but like we don't think about it until we're faced with it,
yeah.
and that's the thing.
The point of having this conversation is to have this conversation
Exactly.
and to see
Yes.
people have it and
Yep.
understand that you can have it and just spark your own thought process through this, basis whatever your lens is and whatever your life experience is.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you're worth it.
You don't totally. And you don't even have to feel you don't have to say like, oh yeah, I think death with dignity is great. You can be totally against it. But
Correct.
thinking about it for yourself, like, and know that these are options that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a lot of people even realize death with dignity is a thing in the US. The things like that, like you don't have to take it up as an option, but you might not you might think that you wouldn't want that, but a lot of times we don't know how we would actually deal with something or what we'd want to do about something until we're experiencing it. So it can
Yeah.
be good to know what your options are and to be thinking of them ahead of time.
Yes. Yep. Yep. You can have these discussions. They're difficult, but you can have it. You're worth it. And this is your life. This is like, that's part of the whole thing is with the existential dread is why we have this podcast is because people don't want to talk about this stuff, but we do. So in
Yeah.
our discussion, um, it frees you to think about it.
Hmm. It's actually important, I think, to have these
Yes.
discussions because, like, one, it just takes a little bit of the fear out of it when we face something head on, right? It's exposure therapy.
Yes.
Actually, is like what we're
Yeah.
doing. We're trying our hand at a little exposure, a little at a time, thinking about this kind of stuff. But also, too, like I've talked about before, like my sister in law, pretty unexpectedly, like she had cancer, but like there was no like terminal diagnosis, and then she died,
Yeah.
and she was only 34, and that was unexpected. And without these conversations, like it's harder even to deal, like if you don't know how somebody feels about this kind of stuff. And this that's obviously not euthanasia, that wasn't like an option for her, but like even just like knowing what she would want done with her body, how to honor her. I think that's a really important point because that's part of the grieving process. One of the most important parts of the grieving process, that's for the living, right? That
Yeah.
how what we do with our loved ones' bodies after they're gone, and doing that in a way where we feel like we're following through on some of their final wishes. That really does a lot to heal us, to help us feel like we're doing something for them after we've lost them.
Yeah. It's love. You're executing uh, their their decisions for them. If you're honoring them and their life choices, that's what we
Yep.
do. It's our responsibility that we take upon ourselves.
Yep. But
It's
if
a
you
good,
avoid this conversation the entire time someone's alive until they're gone, because it's either unexpected or you just don't ever have it, you can't do that.
yeah. It sneaks up on you. Life
Hmm.
comes at you fast. It gets faster the longer you live. And like you were talking about a minute ago, like there's that metaphorical proverbial bus is out there, and you could drop at any moment or have something happen to you, God forbid, at any moment.
Hmm.
Um, and I'd like to have that understood. You know,
Yep.
I want to avoid some of the worst possible outcomes out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think too, there's like a certain like trying to lift the burden. Like when I have this conversation with my husband, yeah, he hates it and he doesn't really want to have it. He will. But like there's I'm trying to do something for him now because if I do die first or something happens to me, then he's grieving, he's going through that loss, and then he's trying to figure all that out, and then he's thinking, what would Brie have wanted? And he's racking his brain trying to figure out and feeling like, is he honoring me? Is he doing something that I wouldn't want? Rather than like I just told him explicitly, this is what I, or like God, you have to pull the plug on me. And
Yeah.
like if he had to make a choice for that, there's so much guilt that could leave him with if I've never explicitly said I would want you to do that. He makes that decision, and then now he's racked with guilt for the rest of his life, right? Like these conversations, they help people honor us, and they also help us to unburden our
Yes.
loved ones in the long term.
That was the word I was going to use. You're saving him from that burden. You said guilt and shame, and perhaps the worst one of all, because it keeps the other ones alive, is uncertainty.
Yeah.
Never knowing
Yes.
if he'd made the right call, so he can never let it go.
Right.
You're saving him from that. That's
Yeah.
love.
Yep. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Have these conversations. Face
Yeah.
it.
Even when they're hard, even when in like you think it's something that you can put off. You don't know if it's something you can put off. You never
No.
know what
No.
you can put off. You
Yeah.
said life comes fast, death comes faster. Like
Yeah.
you know,
Oh, that's
and
a
it's
good
just
way. Yeah, and it's and we all have had this experience. I think the longer you live, that like stuff happens that you would never conceive of. It
yeah.
does. You think you have this mundane, lame existence. Weird shit will occur in your life, and it can put you upside down in bad circumstances. You have these conversations with your family, your friends. Have these conversations with yourself.
Yep.
You're doing yourself a favor.
I think that's a really important thing. Actually, I'm glad that you said that. Have these conversations with yourself. Be thinking about this for yourself, and just pertaining to yourself and just your thoughts and feelings. Like sort that out. We're never going to have a consensus societally about all of this
Yes.
necessarily, but like you can know where you stand and what you
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah. Do that. Think up through yourself, so at least you have an informed opinion,
Yeah.
and then take action.
Yep.
Okay. That's
Cool.
good. That's a
Landed.
good spot. Yeah. Thank you all for being here on the Deaf and All the Red pod. Yeah. Thank you all for being here on the Deaf and All the Rest podcast. It's a tough subject, but it's worth it for you to figure this out and have these conversations with yourself and your family and your friends.
Yeah. And thanks for being here while we talk about it and
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good night.